to another episode of the Afterlife podcast. This is your host, Pooja Chilukuri, and my guest today is Michelle Katz. Michelle is a former producer on award winning film and TV projects. She's the creator and host of the Broken and Healed podcast. She's also the founder of Story is Medicine. It's a creative and spiritual platform devoted to helping others return to the voice that needs to be unburied for healing. And Michelle recently published her book, Awakening in the Age of Metals, which catalogs her story, her journey of her quest from healing from illness and spiritual rebirth. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Well, thank you so much, Pooja. And I am just really honored and grateful to be sitting here and having this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, same, Michelle. I've been reading your book and really enjoying it, even though I find the first part a little difficult because of everything that you went through. But I'm sure the good stuff is coming later, and I will get to it. So, could you walk us a little bit through what your life was like before you had symptoms of illness? And who was Michelle? What was she doing? Things like that.
Sure. Well, before I'd say December 2013, I was living in Los Angeles. I lived in this really cool hillside house in Highland Park, and I woke up to these amazing views every day. I was kind of like living my dream in a way because I had grown up a kid in the 80s, grew up in Staten Island, New York. I was addicted and glued to the television, and I just would see like Three's Company and palm trees and the beach and be like, that is going to be me. I am so going wherever that is. And then I found myself there. And so for years and years, I was flying to different locations, and I was on set, producing films and television shows. I was moonlighting as a songwriter. I was playing in Americana folk duo. I played the House of Blues. I played at little clubs, the Mint, El Cid, all over Los Angeles. I recorded several albums, and I was like just really the quintessential kind of carefree, fun-loving, creative person living just an interesting life. And then what seemed like, looking back, to be almost overnight, I it started with a cold, like a cold that I couldn't shake. And I would get rid of it and it would come back, and I'd get rid of it and it would come back. And I was like, God, it's Los Angeles, it's December, it's beautiful. Like, I don't get colds, in sunny weather. What's going on? And then within a couple of weeks, I remember getting up at my parents' house in Florida. This was January 2014, and I felt like an invisible Mack truck had rolled from my feet all the way up to my head and flattened me, but flattened me on the inside. So nobody else could see what was going on. And when I got up, I couldn't stand. I was extremely dizzy. And, one thing led to another, and it was like my body had been invaded by a foreign agency. It's sort of, I was sort of body snatched, and I developed very severe cognitive symptoms. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't really have conversations. I would have to repeat them in my head to understand what was going on. I couldn't digest any foods. At one point, I could only, and I think I wrote about this, I could only digest three foods. It was like cranberries, sardines, and green beans. That came up on a food allergy, a food sensitivity test. And, and soon I couldn't work because my job was to manage and create and budget very big projects. So that required, a lot of math skills and just cognitively being sharp and with it. And I just didn't have that anymore.
Wow. It's like everything's going fine. You're floating on the water, and all of a sudden, this big wave comes and crashes. So, tell us a little bit more about what sparked that healing quest for you.
Yeah, so I didn't know what had happened. I mean, I every morning I woke up and I thought like I'm in the same house. I'm technically in the same body. I looked around and everything was familiar, but I was gone. My connection to music was gone. My connection to my soul was severed. I knew that much. I hadn't been, I was raised Jewish, but I was not in any way religious, and I was spiritual in a I'd say more like I was open and I was artistic and I was creative, but I didn't really delve very deeply into spirituality. I was just happy enough to be doing what I was doing, and when I wrote music, I had that connection, that mysterious connection, whatever it was, and I was happy with that. But when this happened, I started to have deep anxiety. I had crippling anxiety, and through the night I would wake up with sweating, with night terrors. And I started to have these strange dreams of being in the jungle, and I had never been in the jungle before, and that was confusing to me. And I have to say, during this period of time when I had no idea what was going on, and I'd gone to 18 doctors in Los Angeles and nobody knew what had happened, during this time, my father was very sick. He was, probably in his mid 80s when I got sick. And I had a very kind of complicated relationship with my father. And I'd say during my sickest, at my very lowest point, where I could barely travel, he was getting ready to, he was kind of at the end. And I think we knew that there was only a little bit of time left. And so I was managed to get myself to Florida, and we put him in hospice. And so he was dying at home, and he had nurse care, hospice care, like 24/7. And I was extremely ill at this time. And unbeknownst to me, I had an infected cyst on my back. And it was incredibly painful, but I was ignoring it because nobody around me acknowledged how sick I was. So I just presumed that meant I wasn't sick, and that it was like something that I had dreamt up, or it was I was living some kind of alternative life that nobody else really was there for. And so I proceeded to ignore this, and it started to become infected, and it became abscessed. And right as my father was passing away, I would say the day or the day before, the day of, my brother noticed it, and I had to go to the emergency room. And then what transpired over the next 48 hours was, in retrospect, really, really climactic, like really key. Because what I discovered later was that while my father was dying, something was open in me to such an extent that we began to have shared death experiences, which I can go into. It didn't happen for another couple of years, but in retrospect, it was these 48 hours where I was very, very sick, and he was actually in the process of being in this world and the next world, that we commingled consciousness-wise.
Wow. Well, that's amazing, Michelle. Definitely would like for you to share that with us. Yeah.
So, December 2015, he passed away. I was definitely at my sickest. And I just presumed there is nobody who is sick like I am who's going to live. So I just assumed he went, I'm going to go. I mean, he was 41 years older than me. So in no world did I think that I was going to live very much longer. But I thought maybe, God is giving my family reprieve and putting a little space between his death and mine. But there was no part of my brain that thought, oh, this is I'm gonna live through this. So I made it back to Los Angeles, and I was grieving, and I was sick, and so I was grieving his life and mine together. And over those next few months, I magically found a doctor in Austin. It was through a podcast. I feel like it was a miracle. I feel like he had a hand in what was about to happen over the next couple of years. And I was guided to this doctor in Austin, Texas. She took the one test that nobody took, which was a provoked urine test. And she called me and she said, these are like the highest levels of mercury I've ever seen in my whole entire practice. What in the world? What has happened? And I was like, I don't know. And she asked me about my fillings, and I thought about it, and I said, I do have fillings, but I've had them for 35 years, so I don't presume that this is it. But nonetheless, I started to do all the stuff. I got biological dentistry done, I got my cavitations done, I got root canals, and my brain started to come online, and I started to feel my soul again, and I started to hear birds again, and I started to hear individual lines of music again, ways that I used to hear music that I couldn't any longer because of the mercury in my brain. The crippling anxiety started to fade. I started to be able to eat more foods. It was miraculous. And, I continued with the chelation. I hooked up with a detox coach who had also had mercury poisoning. It was nice to know what it was. It was nice to have a name. And I went on like that for a couple of years, continuing to get better, continuing to chelate. But, this low grade kind of like devastating exhaustion didn't really leave. This feeling that I had a 150-pound sack on my shoulders never left. This depression that I had didn't fully lift. This feeling of just complete and utter exhaustion. So I decided, it was really just random. A friend called me. He told me that he had this miraculous healing using ayahuasca. And I knew him and I knew how much he had struggled over his life. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, look, if this works for him, then I think it could work for me. And I booked my ticket and I went down to Peru, not really having any expectations. I didn't know what ayahuasca was really. And I was still in the place like, if I die, I die doing something cool. That's kind of where I was at, you know. I didn't know what to expect. And I went in and I had one ceremony and it was sort of interesting. And I had another ceremony and I went a little deeper and I thought, well, this is interesting. And it's really my third ceremony where everything just kind of cracked open and became unbelievable. And what happened during this ceremony took me a very long time to process. And even when I was writing my book, I didn't actually have a name for it. But while I was deep in ceremony on the third night, somebody next to me lit something called mapacho, which is an Amazonian tobacco. And it's got a very distinct smell. And this smell, in my deep state of journeying, smelled like smoke. And my father died of COPD, and he was like a chain smoker. And so this tripped something off. And suddenly, I knew, in my journey, I knew that my father was inside of me. Mm. And I was reliving his trauma as a child survivor of the Holocaust. And I was smelling smoke and I was smelling strange perfume that wasn't of the place I was in. And I was hearing noises and sounds and crying and wailing and banging. And this is the first time that I've spoken about it, actually, in a long time. I felt his... He was 10. He was born in 1929. The war broke out in 1939. And he was a young boy. And I didn't know my father as a young boy. I only knew him as a, kind of a rough around the edges, hard drinking man. Mm-hmm. I didn't know what he was like, really. And I didn't know what he had went through, really. And I didn't know his heart until that moment. And I, called for help because I knew that I was sort of wailing and kind of screaming and kind of crying and not sure what was happening to me and not sure if I was going to be needed to, like, if somebody was going to need to take me to a hospital or something. I just didn't know what was going on. And so this, energy and this consciousness was in my body. And it remained with me, and I continued to experience all of his experiences, including exactly how he died, because I was by his side. So the same cough, the same voice, the mannerisms, the movements, every single thing that I saw by the side of his bed was what I was doing myself. And I sounded like him because I was him in that ceremony.
The